Welcome to the Feeling Better podcast. My name is Maria, and I'm the host of this podcast, former gambling addict and devoted Christian homesteading wife. I'm also the author of the Feeling Better 10-4 program that teaches you a practical, effective, inspirational 10-week program to help you overcome your compulsive gambling addiction, which you can listen to in the first 15 episodes of my podcast. Thanks so much for being here. In today's episode, I'm going to be reading from my new book, Imbalances, The Addict's Guide to Fixing Our Broken Lives. This week is Chapter 4, The Imbalance of Busyness. To be honest, I'm not even sure busyness is a proper word, but I think we all know what that means. And ironically, as I alluded to last week, these last few weeks I've been ridiculously busy. But before I dive in, can I please just apologize if at any point I sound lispy or if my words are off? I made some instant coffee yesterday, which I often do in the mid-afternoon when the morning's pot of brewed coffee is all gone, but I need a little pick-me-up. And I got distracted by something and let the kettle of water get to boiling. Then I had the brilliant idea to make the coffee in a metal travel mug, minus the lid because no one likes drinking coffee with a lid, and then took an immediate gulp of it. Ouch, yeah, burnt my taste buds right off. So now I have that numb, fuzzy feeling on the surface of my tongue, which makes recording an hour-long episode a little tough. Fun fact, when I was a kid, I used to call taste buds taster tots. I thought that was a way better way to describe taste buds. For years, I went around talking about my taster tots. And yeah, it never really caught on, but to this day, I still have to pause and remember to call them taste buds. Anyway, so why am I so busy? Well, for one, that job I thought I had, that I actually did have and started, I don't have anymore. I honestly don't have the mental fortitude to get into what happened, but it's nothing juicy. The bottom line is I'm still without a job, still unemployed. And my unemployment runs out in 6 weeks. So my hubby and I, along with his best friend, put our heads together and came up with a few ways to make some money, or do some side hustles or contract work, or launch new businesses, yada, yada, yada. We've literally got about a half a dozen different avenues of potential side businesses or gig contract work that my hubs and I are diving into. Some of it will stick, I hope and pray, and some of it won't. Yet during these last 2 to 3 weeks of all that hustle, I've come to realize 3 important things. 1, I love doing the work with my husband and his best friend. I love it, love it, love it. I wish I could do it full time, and I can't help but to wonder if maybe, just maybe, God might bless me with this new direction, this new path, so I could finally work in a role that brings me fulfillment, joy, purpose, and success. Or, in other words, all the things I didn't have in my previous few roles. I'm essentially taking on all aspects of sales, marketing, and customer service, which are a lot of hats, I know, but that's where my strengths and experiences are. And it's amazingly fun when you aren't doing the work of someone else's vision, or goals, or mission, or business, or money-making, but rather you're doing it for your own vision, goals, mission, and money-making. If any one of those ventures could just make us enough money to cover our bills in the near future, we may be able to build our own business that allows me to continue working in this capacity. Not only is this kind of work personally fulfilling, but it's also really helped to strengthen the partnership and bond with my husband. As I've showcased in a dozen times in previous episodes, marriage is a lot of hard work, and sometimes it can be tough. But when you have deep love and lots of faith and the full intention by both people to work at marriage, amazing things can happen. I've received several emails from listeners offering support, understanding, and sympathy for the situation I described in episode 34, chapter 3, The Imbalance of Self-Importance, in which I shared the main reason for my own gambling addiction downfall. Thank you for all the prayers, my prayer warriors. The important thing is to always keep on loving, always keep on trying, and never give up standing tall in our faith as we continue on in this race of life. The second thing I've come to realize, though, is that not having money just sucks. By God's grace, we've been living on His manna, His daily bread. And I have no idea how, but He just works it out every week. All of our bills are paid up through the end of October. Well, minus all of our debt, but I've kind of given up on all of that at this point. Right now, it's about survival and being able to keep our home and keep the lights on. Every single day, I kick myself in my own hiney for the stupid mistake of falling into a gambling addiction. I'll be completely honest here. We have $150 in the bank, and all of our bills are due again the first week of November. Mortgage, insurance, utilities, internet and cell phone bill, etc. I'm sure many households would be in absolute panic at the current situation of ours, but we've made the decision not to panic, not to worry. God always provides, always. But I'm not going to lie, not having money really bites the big balloon. I've never, ever been in this dire situation. Our local nursery, meaning plants, not babies, is having a huge end-of-season sale where all of their berry bushes and asparagus plants and shrubs and trees are deeply discounted, like 75 to 80% off. They've never done that before. And any other year, I'd be over there buying up blueberry and raspberry bushes or ornamental hydrangea shrubs. But not this year. And can we talk about food for a sec? I don't recall if I've mentioned this before, but we're preppers. My husband and I both are. Not one of those tinfoil hats who have an underground bunker type of prepper, but more like food, water, batteries, and camping supplies. I started doing this about a decade ago when I lived by myself in the middle of the forest and realized that some winter storms could literally render me homebound for a couple of weeks. And if a winter storm was really big or had high winds, it could knock out power for a few days or more. Many of you have probably been there. So I began keeping a pantry and freezer full of food, along with stored water, solar lights, and batteries. Then about 3 years ago, when we bought this house during the COVID lockdowns, when prices started going up and supply lines began getting tighter, God gave me the foresight and wisdom to really get serious about my food supply. Because it wasn't difficult to see that one of the best ways to hedge against inflation was to buy food before the prices went up. And the one thing that we all buy consistently and can keep long term is food. So that's what I did. I started keeping an eye out for good sales and I bought in bulk. Canned food, meat that I could vacuum seal up and put in the freezer, paper products and toilet paper. And all the things that we consume on a regular basis like coffee, powdered creamer, olive oil, oatmeal, flour, sugar, frozen and canned vegetables, canned soup, pasta, rice, lentils, and a zillion other things. Since 2020, I simply rotated the stock. Whenever I used something from my pantry, whether a bottle of ketchup or a packet of yeast or a jar of spaghetti sauce, I would just add it to my shopping list and buy replacements. And before putting it away, I take a Sharpie marker and write the expiration date on it. Then it went on the shelf in the back. First in, first out, meaning the stuff I'd put there first got used first, and the replacements that I put in last got used last, so that nothing went bad or became outdated. It's so funny because whenever anyone came over and saw my pantry, they'd look at me in amused surprise. Expecting the apocalypse, they'd ask, chuckling. I would just shrug my shoulders and say, you never know. In my mind, I always pictured that apocalypse being, in all likelihood, given where we live, a severe winter or ice storm that took down power or snowed us in for a while. But the reality was, my apocalypse that the Lord nudged me to prepare for was my own. Not only had I bought my entire pantry and freezer stock at prices much cheaper than they are now, but it has literally saved us. Because the truth is, we've had very little money for groceries these last 10 to 12 months. There's no way I would have been able to afford any condiments or crackers or snacks or canned foods. When I go to the store now, I buy whatever fresh produce we might need, like onions or celery or bananas or oranges, and then milk and bread, maybe some yogurt and cheese. That's it. I can go to my pantry for everything else. I've depleted about half of what I had in there to start with, But can I just tell you how grateful I am to have my own little grocery store in my home? When I start earning a paycheck again, my plan, in addition to attacking my debt, is going to be replenishing that stock. One thing I noticed, though, on the rare occasion I might splurge for a bag of cookies or box of crackers, is that every single stinking thing is GMO. Even ramen noodles. The last time I was at the grocery store, I wasn't in a rush, so I just lazily walked up and down the aisles, randomly picking up food products. And when I checked out the ingredients, nearly every single product made with wheat or corn that wasn't an organic brand had the notice in teeny tiny minuscule print, made with bioengineered ingredients. That's a fancy way of saying GMO, or genetically modified. Most GMO crops fall into one of two categories, either engineered to resist chemical herbicides and insecticides, or engineered to produce them themselves. Both are bad for the environment, meaning harmful to bees, butterflies, or other insects and pollinators, as well as for human health, because studies in animals show that GMO ingredients can cause cancer. Go ahead and look for yourselves. Every single stinking product seems to contain bioengineered/genetically modified ingredients. Sorry, got off on a little rabbit trail there. The third thing that I learned during these last few weeks of hustling and grinding and working with my hubby to bring in some kind of income is that when you're crazy busy, you tend to take your eyes off of God. It's totally true. Whether it's doing something you enjoy or work that feels like a total grind, it distracts you from your relationship with God. I'll be totally transparent here, as I always try to be. Since the beginning of October, I'd wake up in the morning and instead of sitting and reading my Bible, my brain would begin to churn while I waited for my coffee to brew and fed the animals. Emails that I didn't get to sending the previous day. A call that I needed to make first thing. A file that I needed to send over to our friend, and a Word doc that had to be edited. In my mind, I had the thought, if I can just get this stuff out of the way first, then I'll have cleared my brain and have more time later to spend with God. Yeah, how well do you think that went? Here's the thing about modern life, folks. It's the busiest it's ever been in human history. In ancient times, people had land to plow, or livestock to take care of, or children to raise, or housework that needed to get done, sure. Food to cook, and maybe even a shop or business to manage if you were a merchant of some kind. But in the evenings, the work ended. Those people didn't use their time at the end of the day to respond to emails, or have text conversations back and forth with someone, or pick up their kid from practice, or run out to do a few errands. The women rarely did any kind of work outside the home, and if there was any kind of travel, it took days, not mere minutes or a couple of hours. Even back in the 1950s and 60s, people weren't connected and stressed with busyness the way that humans are now. On top of all the work, or all of the housework, or the parenting work, we tend to use any spare time we have looking at social media, or watching Netflix or YouTube, or participating in group chats or online forums, or playing video games. We never give our poor brains a rest. I look back on just the last few days. While I worked on Excel pivot tables and sent out campaign emails, I watched live streaming news about the Israel-Gaza situation, my phone set up leaning against the base of my monitor. I didn't listen to church sermons because, in my heart, I felt like I was doing a disservice to God, listening with only half my attention. But I didn't take a 20 or 30-minute break to just sit and listen. I've got ADD, as many of you know, and I love when my brain is stimulated. I know this about myself. It's one of the reasons why it was so easy for gambling to become an addiction. I'm constantly multitasking and constantly doing something that is, or at least I hope it is, productive in some way. So much so that last night around 9 p.m., I finally forced myself to stop. I shut down my computer, went into the bedroom, and listened to a sermon while I pulled out the crocheted blanket that I'd been working on for months. The cats jumped up on the bed with me, which drove me bananas because have you ever tried crocheting with a big ball of yarn and a couple of cats nearby? But I snuggled in, trying to allow myself to relax. Then my hubby poked his head in. "What in the world are you doing?" he asked. I, having that Gen X sarcastic kind of humor, gave him a confused look and said, "I'm rock climbing. Isn't it obvious?" He rolled his eyes but smirked. "It's only 9 o'clock. You're in bed already?" I smiled and patted the bed next to me. My poor brain needed a break. I couldn't stare at the screen anymore. "You want to join me?" He did, and so I stopped the sermon and we just chatted for a good half hour or so while I worked on my blanket. It was really nice just to chill, still doing something with my hands, but giving my mind a rest as I kicked it with my hubby and the felines. Friends, can I tell you something? You may already know this on some deep subconscious level, but I need to make this understood. When we overload ourselves with busyness day after day after day, we create a massive imbalance in our lives in two ways. One is that when our mind becomes overfilled with stuff, it's a lot like when you have a browser open on your old MacBook with 10 different tabs, and then you see a banner at the top of your screen that says, "This web page is using significant energy." And then if you don't take care of it by shutting down a few of those tabs, your browser will crash because you've used up all of your memory. Ask me how I know. Your mind will crash, your body will crash, your cortisol levels will rise, and you won't be able to make good, sound, rational decisions. Ever pull an all-nighter or have jet lag from a long flight or have a night or two of really bad sleep? How well did you perform the next day? How clear was your mind? And how efficient were you in getting things done? I'm going to guess not very well. In our Bosu ball analogy, this is the equivalent of leaning too far over in one direction, making you susceptible to the enemy's attacks. The second way that we create an imbalance is by shoving God to the bottom of the list, to place where maybe, if we have some time left over, we'll get to him and spend some time with him. Like the example I showed you earlier of my own line of thinking, this does not work out very well. Putting God at the bottom of your to-do list has a bunch of consequences. When you're too busy to spend time with him, you don't hear his voice very well, nor do you have a sound, wise understanding of his plan for your life. You're too caught up in what you want to do, what you need to do, and what you have to do. This whole particular imbalance is perfectly illustrated within the book of Haggai. If you aren't familiar with Haggai, he's considered to be one of the minor prophets. You see, in the Bible, there are the major prophets, described as major because their books are longer, the content has broader reach, and the implications regarding geography, kingdoms, and history or future. Major prophets are those like Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Jeremiah, etc. The minor prophets are not called minor because their writings are any less important, but instead their books are shorter and more narrowly focused on one topic or situation. Haggai was a minor prophet, and the book of Haggai is only 2 chapters long, but it's the perfect book to refer here in this chapter of busyness, and you'll see why as I read. The background on this is that Haggai was a Jewish prophet who lived about 500 years before Christ was born. Now, for those of you who may not know any of this, the Jewish people had been held captive in Babylon back around 600 years before Christ was born. Remember we talked about Babylon before? Yes, it's a real city. Back then, it was a rich and wealthy and powerful kingdom, ruled by King Nebuchadnezzar II, the great Chaldean king. But recall how I explained Babylon is also a metaphor for the enemy of God and the enemy of his people, Satan. In this part of biblical history, God allowed a great and powerful enemy to attack and capture the Jewish people. What do we know about spiritual attacks? They almost always are some form of discipline, correction, or punishment, right? They always have a purpose. I'm not going to get into the detail, but you can find tons of YouTube videos out there about this, or, of course, you can read your Bible. But the land of Israel had once been united under King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. But when Solomon died, Rehoboam, Solomon's son and successor, took over, and Israel had a bit of a civil divide, splitting the kingdom of Israel in two. Judah was to the south, with the capital of Jerusalem, and was ruled by King Rehoboam at first, with others to follow. And the part in the north, Israel, set up its capital city in Samaria and was ruled by King Jeroboam. Imagine if the U.S. had another civil war, North versus South. Bickering, infighting, war, bloodshed. It all continued in the land with brother fighting against brother. Finally, though, God said, enough is enough. The Assyrians came in and attacked Israel in the north, totally decimated them. The Jews who lived in that part of the north were scattered and never heard of again. So in our modern analogy, imagine Russia coming in and attacking and taking over the new northern United States. And everyone who lived there was taken off to Russia, never to be seen or heard of again. So that left the southern part, Judah, which had continued on. But not long after, they too were attacked and captured by the Babylonians. The Babylonians came and took people in various waves. Again, in our analogy, that would be like China attacking and taking over the southern states of America. First, they took all the celebrities and politicians and rich business owners. And then they came for everyone else, leaving behind only a few poor farmers to take care of the land. In our story of Judah, when the Babylonians came for the masses of people in the second wave, they destroyed the big, beautiful, amazing temple that King Solomon had built in Jerusalem, just reduced it to rubble. Then the Jewish people remained in the captivity of the Babylonians for 70 years. That was a dark time for the Jews. We hear about the Israeli-Hamas situation in the news now, with newscasters and journalists bringing up references to the Holocaust. Many don't even realize that the Jews have had some serious hard times as a people, going all the way back to the beginning. It's absolutely remarkable that Israel still exists today, and we know why. Back then, while they were in Babylonian captivity, the hope and the resolve of the Jewish people must have been devastating. Again, go back to our example of America. Imagine the Chinese, and no offense to anyone who might be Chinese, I'm just using this as a hypothetical example. Imagine the Chinese came in and then invaded the southern U.S., destroying Washington, D.C. and all of our churches and schools, and then took us all off to China. That would feel pretty hopeless now, wouldn't it? That's what the Jews felt back then, living as captives by the Babylonians. But the Babylonians served a purpose according to God's plan, and eventually this kingdom that loved wealth and excess and worshiping false gods was overtaken by the Persian Empire. The Persians allowed the Jews to go back home. If you read the book of Ezra, Scripture states that the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, the king of Persia, to allow the Jews to go back home and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem under the guidance of Joshua the high priest. And what was Persia, my friends? Yeah, you got it. Persia was the name of what today is known as Iran. Crazy to see things as they are today, isn't it? Things have come full circle, only backward. Now, Iran and the Persians want to remove the Jews and take them out of Jerusalem again. Anyway, back to our minor prophet Haggai. The Jewish people went back to Israel and began rebuilding their homes in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. Something like 17 years had gone by, and still the temple was under construction, barely even started. This right here is the whole reason I'm telling you this story. Now, I don't know about your life, but let me tell you, I absolutely see parallels to my own. Listen to this first passage about what's being implied. Remember, these are not people who are worshiping other gods. They loved the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they were grateful that they were released from captivity and given a new life. But listen to the message from God that Haggai gives to the Jewish people, from Haggai 1, verses 2 through 15. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, "The time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house." Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thoughts to your ways. You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You put on clothes, but you are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thoughts to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why, declares the Lord Almighty? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the olive oil, and everything else the ground produces, on people and livestock and all the labor of your hands. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I am with you, declares the Lord. So the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of the whole remnant of the people. They came and began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty, their God, on the 24th day of the 6th month. Now let me break this down for you. These people weren't sitting around with glasses of hard cider, lying around in their hammocks all day, binging Netflix and stuffing their faces with pumpkin donuts or whatever they did for pleasure back then. They were working hard to rebuild their homes, clean up the rubble and detritus of the city, and make a new life for their families. And that wasn't what God opposed. God knows we need to do these things. He knew that the people back then needed that, and that today in our lives now, we need to work and take care of our families. But when we let it go on too long and neglect Him, because, and I quote, each of us is too busy with our own house, then, my friends, that's going to cause some serious imbalance in our lives. In Haggai's time, that imbalance of not setting aside time to do God's work for His kingdom or to spend time with God resulted in a drought upon their land, their abundance, their success, and their finances. If we look at our lives, let's just take mine as an example. It's not difficult to see drought in my life, right? Not literal because there's no rain, but most people in ancient times, outside of Noah that is, equated rain with blessing and abundant crops. Yet my life is pretty devoid of blessing and abundant crops. In the last year of my life, since last October, I've spent a ton of time with God, repenting, praying, healing, reading scripture, and watching sermons. And God knew I needed that for sure. But was all of that for Him, or was it for me? Without a doubt, I can say that it was mostly all for me. I needed to overcome. I needed to heal. I needed to repent. I needed to feel close to God. Again, we're back to I, instead of him. Now today, I look around and I still see dry desert and drought. Yes, I'm blessed, of course, just like God still loved His people. But compared to what we could have, or should have, or did have at one time, it's pretty bleak. And so, as I go through this book and assess the different imbalances, I can see pretty clearly that busyness is a big one. Just this week, my husband and I told each other that we were going to read the Bible first thing in the morning. But do you think we did that? Nope. I want you all to know that if you're truly earnest in seeking the answers, God will give them to you. Look at that last part of Haggai, when he gives this message from the Lord to all the people. I am with you. You might be going through a season of drought, even though you've long ago stopped gambling. And if that's the case, ask yourself if this could be one of your big imbalances. And if you do spend time with God, is it all about you? I asked God this week, how could I spend more time on His kingdom, helping to build His temple, which today is the church? And He gave me two very distinct answers. Number one, don't cut corners and put this podcast last. Remember, I'm under contract with God. Other than a couple of small donations that some kind and generous people have sent my way, I earn nothing from this podcast. So He knows I need to earn income. He's not telling me to spend all my time doing this and working on this, but I also understand that this isn't to be an afterthought, some rush job that I do just to get it out in time for Sunday. He doesn't want me phoning this in or throwing it together last minute on a Saturday night. Somehow, somewhere, this podcast is going to touch lives, if it isn't already. I've said before that I take no credit for any of it. If you're listening to this and it's helping you, then this comes from God. The second answer to my question to God on how I could do more for His kingdom is actually the solution that I'm going to give all of you for this imbalance. You cannot hear God's instruction for your life and what He wants you to do if you're constantly busy and on the go. You won't have the peace in your heart and in your spirit if your mind is racing with a million things and you've got a to-do list a mile long and you're multitasking from morning to night. I mean, hello, even God rested after all His work was done. Give yourself one day. In fact, that's ultimately what the Sabbath is. It's God giving us permission and really instruction to take one day of rest. I can tell you right now, I really struggle with this. Remember the Sunday scaresies I talked about before? That feeling of dread and anxiety that you feel around Sunday at 5 p.m. when you start to think about Monday morning work? Well, like I described previously, that apprehension and anxiety can really kick in hard for me if I haven't gotten done all the chores and laundry and cleaning and things that I want to get done in order to start my week fresh with a clean environment. And that doesn't include any special projects I might have, like cleaning my pantry, or organizing a closet, or working in my garden, or running weekend errands. Despite my best intentions to do it all on Saturday, a lot of times it spills over into Sunday. We'll spend time with God on Sunday morning, but by noon, I'm back to sweeping and cleaning and laundry or whatever. So how do we fix this? How do we balance out busyness to keep drought from sucking all the life out of us? How do we ensure that we're obeying God with this one? The simple answer is to take Sundays off, or Saturdays, or if you work on the weekends, make a different day your Sabbath day. That's the simple answer. But simple doesn't mean easy. How do we do that? Well, the complex but effective answer is that we need, I need, to find a better way to plan and organize my week. If I can stay on top of things and designate specific tasks for each day, then by Sunday, I won't have anything left. My schedule and task list will be clear. Not only will that allow me time on Sunday to rest and spend time with God and His Word, but I can tell you right now, just saying that already makes me feel more in control, more organized, and less frantic and overwhelmed. As a tech gal, one of the pieces of software that I really love and use a lot for work stuff and project management is Trello. If you've ever used this, then the light bulb just went on and you're suddenly seeing the light. I know, it's genius if I may say so myself. If you're not familiar with it, just do a YouTube search for a couple of demo videos. It's free and it's pretty slick. You just create lists of things to do, and you can put a card in each list identifying what those things are. Then you can pick each thing, do it, and then throw it in a done column when you're finished with it. Of course, there are a zillion other apps and software out there that you can use. Or a good old-fashioned list on the refrigerator works too. Or a wet marker on your bathroom mirror. Or a dry erase board. Or a list on your notes app. Whatever. Make a list of the things that you have to do each week, and then break them up into 6 days' worth of tasks. I just did this now for myself. And because I literally sit on my hind end all day stinking long, I even worked in a bit of exercise. You can also add in time to whittle down any long-term goals and color code them to organize it. So, for example, starting next week, my Monday looks like this. Morning, 30 minutes of Bible reading. Send in 10 job applications. Work on a hubby stuff for 2 hours. Afternoon, get 30 minutes of treadmill time in. Create and upload 1 YouTube video, because I'm still working on that. Clean kitchen thoroughly. Evening, make dinner, which is planned out ahead of time, of chicken, bacon, and ranch wraps. and write 4 pages for next week's podcast. Tuesday's schedule looks like this: 30 minutes of Bible reading, send in 10 job applications, work on hubby stuff for 2 hours, spend an hour working on backup to hard drive, one of those long-term projects of mine, 10 minutes of stretching and deep breathing, make dinner, which is grilled cheese with bacon and tomato soup, and write 4 pages of my podcast. Wednesday is pretty much the same, only this time I clean the bathroom. Thursday, same thing, but I do laundry and clean the bedroom. And Friday, I have a bit of a lighter day because I plan now to record and edit my podcast on that day, which is about a 3 to 4 hour project. And with that, I now have Saturday to devote to more time doing any errands or odds and end chores that I might want to tackle that I didn't get to during the week. Like last weekend, my husband and I cleaned out the garden beds. I still have 2 more to do. Plus, we have to get the chicken coop ready for winter. But before, I would spend a Thursday working on something like uploading 4 or 5 YouTube videos in a row. Or last week, one day, I spent a good 6 or 7 hours helping my hubby out with all his stuff and neglected any household chores, so I had to do that over the weekend. Even if I start a new job soon, I can still work in all of this stuff in a schedule so that I'm not cramming all of it in on the weekend. So what am I going to do next Sunday? Rest, relax, listen to sermons, read the Bible. Every single Sunday. Ask God what He's got next for me that He wants me to work on. Remember that story of my church from a while back? Well, it turns out that the people who left that church from the Great Divide now started up a new church and invited us out to it. It's a good half hour away from us, more on days when we'll have snow and bad weather, and so I was hesitant to go at first. It's gas money that we can't afford, and wear and tear in our vehicles that we can't afford, and time that we can't afford. But yeah, says who? God is giving us permission to take the time, to rest, to take one day and do what He directs us to do. I don't know if that church will lead to anything, or if instead I'll hear God sending me off in a new direction. But I know that I won't hear Him at all if I'm constantly being pulled in a million different busy directions, my mind on other things, my own household needs, and ignore Him. There are 154 different mentions of the term Sabbath in the New International Version of the Bible. That obviously means it's important to God. He tells us that He gives us His Sabbath, His gift and command for us. And not just for us, but others around us, family, friends, even animals. Everybody needs to rest. And when we rest, we calm our flesh and let the Spirit rule our day. From Deuteronomy 5:14, "But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do." From Isaiah 58, verses 13 and 14. "If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land, and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." And if you think that the Sabbath is only an Old Testament thing and that Jesus erased or did away with the Sabbath, you would be wrong. When Jesus confronted the Pharisees about the Sabbath, it was because they were being so pious and nitpicky about it. You see, the Pharisees were a group of highly exalted religious leaders back in Christ's time, and it's not unlike the Orthodox Jews of today, who, some, refuse to even flip on a light switch on the Sabbath. There are 39 categories that define work in the modern Orthodox Jewish rules, and some of them, like the Pharisees of Jesus' time, interpret it too far. For example, one of the decrees is that winnowing is a form of work that shall not be done. Back in old times, that was how people separated the wheat grain from the chaff, which is the inedible outer part of the grain. People who had wheat fields would grab handfuls of the stalks and wave them forcefully in the wind. The lighter chaff that made up the outer part of the seed would blow away, while the heavier seed fell to the ground. Now, clearly, this was a form of work that the Jews were prohibited by God to do on the Sabbath. But I've seen references that anything from fanning yourself in the heat to shaking off dust from your clothes will also fall under that category, which is just silly. In the New Testament, Matthew tells us in chapter 12, verses 1 through 2, that Jesus and his disciples were walking and they were hungry. So they picked a few grains from the wheat fields to eat. The Pharisees saw this and they were indignant, insisting that Jesus and his followers were breaking the Sabbath. You can kind of picture Jesus rolling his eyes here, telling the Pharisees that even King David, when on the run, was hungry and went into the temple and ate the bread that was consecrated for God, meaning there was no need to be so militant about the rules, that they had to understand the deeper meaning and the context in which God was giving it. There's another passage in the Bible where Jesus healed a man with a shriveled hand on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees condemned him. But Jesus shot back at them from Matthew 12, verses 11 and 12. If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. The point is, you don't need to be uncompromising, precise, and literal with the Sabbath doctrine. It's just a day of rest for you to recharge, recalibrate, and recenter yourself with God. The reality is, rather than focusing on getting all your chores done on the weekend to start your week clean and fresh, like I was so concerned with, it's much better to start your week with mind and soul and body clean and fresh and rejuvenated, in balance and alignment with God. Does all that make sense? In today's generation of workaholics and overburdened schedules and social media that clutters our minds and wastes precious time, it's easy to think that the more you do, the more you're doing it right. But that's not what God tells us. Psalm 46:10 tells us, "Be still and know that I am God." How many times in your last week did you find time to simply be still? I can tell you that I had none. And that's something we can easily control and master. If you can't master your own time, your own agenda, to organize and plan out your days, then you're going to feel like a whack-a-mole game. For those of you who are in other countries that don't know what that is, it's a game Americans play at carnivals and fairs, where you have a soft mallet in your hand, and you have to hit a little mechanized puppet mole that pops up randomly out of different holes. You have to be quick, and you have to be precise, and it's stressful because you don't know where it's going to pop up next. Life can be similar. Without planning, goal setting, and organization in your daily and weekly life, you're just going to be hopping from one thing to the next, attacking each thing as it pops up. And every time you tackle one, another thing will appear. And with that kind of frenzied, unplanned, unorganized day, you'll suddenly find yourself at the end of your week overwhelmed with all the things that you still haven't gotten done. And with God at the bottom of your list, you'll never get to him because moles, which can be chores, problems, tasks, or other things, will pop up and keep them down at the bottom. Living life this way causes stress, anxiety, and overwhelming feelings of burden and failure. Ask me how I know. For some, this can be a contributor as to why you took refuge in the trap of gambling addiction, or perhaps alcohol, or drugs, or food, or whatever kind of addiction took a hold of you. The dopamine rushes that come with addiction help to ease the stress and worry and feelings of being overwhelmed. For others, this may be the major reason why you fell into an addiction. I know a gal who's a mother with teenage kids, who's caring for her elderly, aging mother, who broke her hip recently, who volunteers at her kids' school as well, and whose husband travels frequently for work. And she works a full-time job. She's always saying that she feels overwhelmed and can never catch up, And on top of it all, they struggle financially. One of her kids is a senior in high school, and she's burdened by how expensive it is to have all of those financial costs for senior year. She told me not too long ago that it seems like the more they work, the less they have. And the harder they work, the less they get ahead. I don't know about you, but I so identify with that. This woman's got a lot of real responsibility on her plate that's critical to her family's life. And I feel the same way she does. The harder I work, the less I get ahead, and the less money I seem to bring in. And why is that? What's the reason that we aren't seeing the fruitful blessing of abundance in our lives that brings us peace and security and comfort? The answer comes down to balance. And one of those areas of balance that we need to address is the balance of busyness versus rest. God does not tell us to split work and rest 50-50. He's not unreasonable. There are 7 days in a week, and He instructs us to rest for one of them. That's less than 15% of our total week. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter how much you've got going on, taking one day of rest is key. Because you have to understand that when you're focused 100% on your life and the lives of your family members, you're going to miss out on a huge blessing. You're purposely and literally choosing hardship over blessing. God has a set of principles by which He governs His people and raises us from children to adults. And part of that holy book of principles is that when we humans focus too much on ourselves and not enough on God, or when we don't obey God's rules because we think our lives, our desires, or our needs and responsibilities are more important than Him, then He will correct us. It's as simple as that. This is a lesson that I am still learning, and I'm working on it myself. You have to look at it like this. Say you have a child that you're homeschooling, and that child refuses to do their work. They enjoy the fun parts about homeschooling, maybe the hands-on science projects or arts and crafts or outdoor learning. But when it comes to important things like reading or math, they insist they don't want to do it because they want to do other things that they find more fun instead, or that they enjoy more instead, or that they think is more important. And no matter how you try to get them to focus and do the things that you're instructing them to do, they ignore you and do their own thing instead. Now, as a parent whose job it is to raise wise, educated, knowledgeable, well-rounded kids, are you just going to say, "It's okay, sweetie, I understand. You think this is more important, and so you don't have to do the things that I'm asking you to do. I love you anyway. Here's a cupcake and a surprise present filled with toys." No, that's obviously sending the wrong message. You'll gently correct and reprimand them and try to explain the importance of what they need to do. But if they keep disobeying, then you're going to need to punish them, right? I know punishing and reprimanding kids these days is a highly unpopular topic. Satan has convinced many parents in today's Western society that it's bad parenting to punish or correct a child, and it's good parenting if you allow a child to do whatever they want to do. We've talked about this before, but when done in love, punishment, discipline, and correction shapes and molds and refines little humans so that they become wise, hardworking, intelligent, and generous adult humans. Without the punishment or discipline, kids will grow up to be selfish, lazy, rebellious, impulsive, inconsiderate adult humans who lack direction, motivation, and accomplishment. Allow me to close this out with more from the book of Haggai so that we can understand God's directive for us and see clearly how He tells us ahead of time what that discipline is going to look like and what will happen if we obey and step out of our busyness and set aside time for Him. When the people in Jerusalem listened to Haggai and began setting aside some of the busyness of their own lives and households to work on rebuilding God's temple, God reminds Haggai that they are doing the right thing and encourages everyone that they need to continue forward with that goal in mind. That is how it is with this people and this nation, says the Lord. Everything they do and everything they offer is defiled by their sin. Look at what was happening to you before you began to lay the foundation of the Lord's temple. When you hoped for a 20-bushel crop, you harvested only 10. When you expected to draw 50 gallons from your winepress, you found only 20. I sent blight and mildew and hail to destroy everything that you worked so hard to produce. Even so, you refuse to return to me, says the Lord. Think about that 18th day of the month, the day when the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid. Think carefully. I'm giving you a promise now while the seed is still in the barn. You have not harvested your grain yet, and your grapevines, fig trees, pomegranates, and olive trees have not yet produced their crops. But from this day onward, I will bless you. Haggai 2, verses 14 through 19 from the New Living Translation. God bless you all, stay safe, and I'll see you again next Sunday when I read Chapter 5, The Imbalance of Relationships. It'll be a doozy, so be sure to tune in. Thanks again for listening.
Like holy water, like salve on a bird, rain in a drought, it's all over now. When daylight comes over the long night, open